Okay, so we're going to cover another factor by grouping example. So again, here we do notice that we do have 4 terms in our problem, which is one of the for sure ways that we do know that we're using factor by grouping. And typically factor by grouping tells us that we're going to group together our first 2 terms and we're going to group together our second 2 terms. And what we're looking to do is we need to find the greatest common factor out of these 2 terms. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cover up the second part of our example so that we can focus on the first part. So taking a look at the first part here, we need to find our greatest common factor. So then we need to compare our numbers and we need to compare our variables. So taking a look at our numbers, a 6 and a 15, we're looking for what number, what factor does a 6 and a 15 share. So for example, taking a look at 6, the only factors of 6 are 1 times 6 and 2 times 3. And we need to see, really, do one of the factors inside of 6 also fit inside of 15. And really the only one that works here is the 3. 3 is the only number out of those that would go into 15. So therefore I can say that 6 and a 15 share a factor of 3. Taking a look at my variables, for the first term here I have an ST, for this one I have a T. So since the first one has an S and the second one doesn't, they obviously don't have it in common, so I can't use that. They do each have a T, and they're each a T to the first power, so that's what they have in common. So as far as my numbers were concerned, they had a 3 in common, and as far as the variables, they both shared a T. Okay, so if 3t is our greatest common factor, what we're looking to do is we're wanting to factor that out. So if we remember, factoring out a greatest common factor is the same thing as dividing it out. So what we're going to do, since 3t was our GCF, we're going to divide it out of our 2 terms here to see what we're left over with. So let's go ahead and do this division. Now remember, we divide number by number and we use our quotient rule for the variables. So 6 divided by 3 is a 2. That S, again, for our variables we're using quotient rule, and quotient rule says that when we are dividing like bases, that we subtract the exponents, the top exponent minus the bottom exponent. So here I have an S. I don't have an S in my denominator, so I'm actually just going to drop that one down and work with the T's. So here I have t to the first power divided by t to the first power. So quotient rule says to subtract 1 minus 1 is 0, which means those t's go away. Or better yet, we do have a rule that says anytime we have the same thing over itself, it equals 1. So since we have a t over a t, those would cancel out. So let's drop down the plus sign that we have there and divide the next term. Here we're doing 15 divided by 3, which is 5. And once again, we have a t over a t, so that would actually cancel out. So let's take a look at our second grouping now. Okay, so taking a look at our second grouping then, we're comparing a negative 10s and a negative 25. Now, one thing we do need to be aware of when doing this one here is that when it comes to factoring out a greatest common factor, the only time we ever factor out a negative is when it's in our leading term. So because we have a negative here in front, that means we will need to factor that out. So it is going to be part of our greatest common factor. So we do need to pull out that negative. Then we need to take a look at our numbers and find a common factor with our numbers. Well, again, let's start with our smallest number, because if it's in common, it's easier to start with your smallest number because our factors can't be any bigger than that. So factors of 10 are 1 and 10, and 2 and 5. And the only one of these numbers that goes into 25 is the 5. So 5 would be my greatest common factor as far as the numbers are concerned. So we've pulled out the negative, we've pulled out the 5, now we need to look at our variables. Taking a look at our variables, we have an S here, but we do not have that S in the second term, which means it can't be in common with this grouping then. So therefore, our greatest common factor is the negative 5. So we're going to pull out a negative 5 and see what we get. So again, pulling out the negative 5 is the same thing as dividing it out. So we're going to divide it out from these two terms and see what we get. A negative 10 divided by a negative 5. Well, let's see, a negative divided by a negative is positive. 10 divided by 5 is 2. That s, we don't have an s in our denominator to divide it by, so we're just going to drop that down. Taking a look at our second division, we have a negative 25 divided by a negative 5. So once again, a negative over a negative will cancel, so we now have a positive here. And 25 divided by 5 is 5. So we're left with a 2s plus 5. Now take a look at what we have here. So take a look at our overall problem that we have left over. So remember, when it comes to factor by grouping, what we're looking to have is the same factors left inside these parentheses, which we do have here. Notice we do have the 2s plus 5 and the 2s plus 5. So what we need to do is we need to factor out a GCF again. So since we have the 2s plus 5 in common, what we're going to do is we're going to factor out the 2s plus 5. Now remember, when we factor that out, it's the same thing as dividing it out. So that when we divide it out here, we're going to divide each one of our terms by the 2s plus 5. Now when we do this, also remember that one rule that says that when you have the same term, or that means, I'm sorry, the same thing over itself, it cancels out to a 1. So 2s plus 5 over 2s plus 5 would cancel. 2s plus 5 plus 2, over 2s plus 5 over here would also cancel. So what we would have left over is the 3t minus 5, leaving us with these two factors here as our solution. So factor by grouping, we factored it out into these two terms here. Now, if you want to check your work to make sure that you are correct, remember you can just multiply these back out. So refresh your multiplying polynomial skills, distribute these two factors out, and you should be left with the original problem up here. All right, otherwise we are done.